Vignette 13. Ambush at the Sadr-e Azam Hill by Dr. Muhammad Wali. It was August 1984. We had information that a Soviet supply column would come to Kabul from the north. There's a small hill on the highway south of Kali Murad, map 14 Murad. It is the Sadr Azam Hill. It is an excellent site for an ambush, and we set up our ambush on the hill to the east of the highway. I had 30 Mujahideen and 4 RPG-7s. This area was closely watched by the enemy, and so we could not spread our force out. Therefore, I concentrated the force on the hill with the rifles forward and the RPGs higher up on the hill. We thought that the convoy would arrive at 1600 hours and were in place before that time. At 1600 hours, the convoy came. It was led by a BMP. Soviet soldiers were sitting on top of the BMP. Usually we would not attack the head of the column, but since the lead vehicle was such a good target, we opened fire on it and destroyed it. We took the column by surprise. The column stopped, and the enemy dismounted some soldiers who took up positions and fired back at us. We fired at each other for about an hour until a relief column arrived from nearby Kabul to help the ambushed column. We pulled out. The enemy lost 1 BMP, 4 gasoline tankers, and probably about 10 killed and wounded. We lost Malik Mohammed from Kharazmir, who was killed. Commentary. This is typical of the small-scale ambushes that the Mujahideen regularly conducted. The losses on both sides were minor, yet over time they added up. The Soviet soldiers customarily rode on top of their APCs since it is safer if the APC hit a mine. A powerful anti-tank mine blast might severely hurl the soldiers off the APC, whereas it would almost certainly kill everyone inside. Furthermore, the inside of an APC is crowded, is hard to see out of, and in August is unbearably warm. The convoy was hemmed in by the village of Morad Beg, so the Soviets had difficulty maneuvering armored vehicles forward to fire into the ambush site. Since the object of the ambush was to destroy vehicles, it made sense to hit the head of the convoy. If the object had been to capture weapons, then the attack on the middle or end of the convoy would have been better. Available terrain kept the Mujahideen ambush compact, which is not what they prefer. This is closer to a Western-style ambush. After the initial firing, the ambush turned into a desultory, protracted sniping exercise, which was more like an afternoon's recreation for the ambushers than decisive combat. Vignette 14. Ambush at Mazar Creek by Commander Qazi Galjan Tayeb. East of my base in Baraki Barak is the town of Pakab-e-Shana. It is located 1.5 kilometers from the Kabul-Gardez highway. The Soviets had put security posts on the high ground around this town to protect the highway from Mujahideen attacks coming out of Baraki Barak district. I decided to attack these posts in July 1985. By the time I had switched from the Hikmatyar faction to the Sayaf faction. We moved out from Baraki Barak at dusk. I had some 100 Mujahideen with me. We crossed the highway and entered Pakab-e-Shana town. It is a large town occupying a square kilometer and containing some 1,000 houses. My Mujahideen moved into houses and stayed with the people throughout the next day. That night, using local guides, we set up ambushes on the roads leading into the village. The area around the town is also a green zone with orchards and woods, map 15 Mazar. Mazar Creek passes through the town near the bazaar. Mazar Creek begins at a spring and has good water. Soviet soldiers would go to the creek to get water, wash, fish, and take a dip. We put an ambush at the creek near the spring. We put another ambush along their supply route, which ran to the Soviet security posts from the main road. There was a path that ran from the security posts to the town dwellings. Soviets would often come down this path to the town to steal or extort things. We set our third ambush along this path in an area covered by buildings and orchards where the enemy maneuver would be restricted and constrained. We set our fourth ambush along the path from the creek to Mir Gayas Hill. In the morning, a few Soviets came to the creek. The Mujahideen at this ambush site opened fire and then left quickly after they saw that they had killed some Soviets. About the same time, a Soviet jeep drove along the supply route. That ambush opened fire and hit the jeep. Soviet tanks came from Puli Alam and surrounded the town. We hid our weapons and mixed with populace. Gradually, we left the area disguised as civilians and went to the north and west. We had 2 wounded Mujahideen. We killed 12 Soviets, destroyed 1 jeep, and captured 4 weapons. Commentary. The Soviets had set a pattern of behavior which enabled the Mujahideen ambushes. They used the same roads and paths regularly. Their behavior toward the villagers made the villagers willing accomplices in setting the ambushes and hiding the Mujahideen and their weapons. The DRA had traveled propaganda civil affairs teams which provided entertainment, medical treatment, and pro-regime propaganda throughout Afghanistan. Their actions, however, did not offset the effects of poor behavior by Soviet combat forces. Vignette 15. Ambush at Kufas Tangay by Major Sher Aka Koche. On August 13, 1985, my 40-man Mujahideen force moved from its base at Sewak, 20 kilometers southeast of Kabul. To establish an ambush at the Kufas Tangay, some 25 kilometers east of Kabul, the area was protected by a Saradanoy Internal Ministry Forces regiment. This area was previously protected by tribal militia, but exactly 1 year prior, the local tribal militia of Hassan Khan Karokel defected to the Mujahideen. Hence, the regiment deployed east of Kabul between Gazak and Sarobi to protect the power lines supplying electricity from Naglul and Sarobi hydroelectric dams to Kabul. The regiment's headquarters was at Surkandao, and its forces were deployed along the Butak-Sarobi Road and security posts. Map 16A, Kufas 1. Each day, the regiment sent truck convoys with supplies from headquarters to the battalions. In turn, battalions sent trucks to make deliveries to all their highway outposts. About 2 kilometers from the DRA Mullah Omar base, the road cuts across the mouth of a narrow valley called Kufas Tangay. Kufas Tangay begins at the Kaki Jabar Pass in the south and stretches north to the Gazak-Sarobi Road. The valley offered a concealed approach from the Mujahideen bases in Khord Kabul in the south. The road at the mouth of the valley passes through difficult terrain, forcing the traffic to move very slowly. This was a favorable point for an ambush. I moved my detachment at night, reaching the ambush site early in the morning of August 13th. My group was armed with 4 RPG-7 anti-tank grenade launchers, several light machine guns, and Kalashnikov automatic rifles. I grouped my men into 3 teams. I positioned a 10-man party with the 4 RPG-7s at the bottom of the valley near the road. I positioned 2 15-man teams on each of the ridges on the 2 sides of the valley that dominated the road to the north. Both of the flank groups had PK machine guns. Map 16B, Kufas 2. The plan was to wait until the enemy's supply vehicles arrived at the difficult stretch of road directly facing the Kufas Tangay Valley. I planned to assign targets to the RPGs as the trucks moved into the kill zone. For example, number 1, fire at the lead truck. I hoped to engage 4 trucks simultaneously, maximizing surprise and firepower. The teams on the ridges were to cover the valley with interlocking fields of fire and support the withdrawal of the RPG teams while repelling any enemy infantry. They would also seize prisoners and carry off captured weapons and supplies once they had destroyed the enemy convoy. Finally, the group heard a vehicle approaching from the east. Soon an enemy jeep appeared around a bend in the road. As the jeep slowly moved over the rocky road to the ambush site, a machine gunner on the ridge suddenly opened up fire at the vehicle. I was extremely upset because the ambush had been compromised and ordered 1 RPG-7 gunner to kill the jeep before it escaped. A few seconds later, the vehicle was in flames and the wounded driver was out of the jeep. He was the sole occupant of the vehicle. He was returning from the battalion headquarters at Ladaband, where he had driven the regimental political officer. We gave him first aid and released him. He was a conscript soldier from the Panjshir Valley who had recently been press-ganged into the military. The Sarandoy sent out patrols from the nearby Spinatana and New Manak outposts. Because it was too risky to remain at the ambush site, we withdrew through the Kufas Tangay Valley to our base. Commentary. The Mujahideen ambush failed for lack of fire discipline. The unauthorized initiation of fire compromised a carefully planned and deftly prepared ambush. It was always a challenge for Mujahideen commanders to train and control a volunteer force fighting an organized military power. Further, some Mujahideen commanders ignored certain basic control measures. It is not clear what arrangements Major Aka made to control the fire of the Mujahideen deployed on the ridges. Had the commander assigned subgroup leaders on each ridge with clear instructions to control the fire of the teams, the outcome of the ambush would have been different. The ambush also lacked sufficient early warning, which could communicate the size, composition, and activity of approaching convoys. If the commander had early warning and a chain of command, he could have anticipated the arrival of vehicles using something other than sound, determined whether or not to attack the vehicles, and gotten his new orders to his men in a timely manner. Vignette 16. Sisay Ambush by Commander Haji Mohammed Sadiq. In October 1985, several Mujahideen groups cooperated to establish an ambush at Sisay, some 5 kilometers north of the Sayyidabad district headquarters in Wardak province. The ambush site is located along the main highway between Kabul and Ghazni. It is located at the mouth of the valley, which extends to Logar and offers concealed approach and withdrawal routes for an ambush force. The terrain facilitates the use of all types of weapons by an ambushing force while restricting maneuver to a force caught in the kill zone. Maulawi Faizan, the Wardak provincial leader of HIH, was overall commander of the Sisay combined ambush. He had information from his sources that a large Soviet DRA column would move from Kabul to Ghazni. Maulawi Faizan planned the ambush at Sisay and called on several local Mujahideen groups to participate. Map 17, Sisay. He assembled a combined force of 80 Mujahideen armed with 4 82mm mortars, 6 82mm recoilless rifles, 4 60mm mortars, 10 RPG-7s, an assortment of Goryunov machine guns, AK-47 assault rifles, and bolt-action Enfield rifles. I brought my group from Logar province. It took us 3 hours to reach the ambush site. Normally, we organized our force into 6-man teams, but due to the expected strength of the enemy column, we organized our force into 10-man teams. The ambush had 3 groups, an assault group, a support group, and a heavy weapons group. The assault group had 4 teams, 40 men, armed with the anti-tank weapons. It deployed on Gully Hill close to the road. The support group was located behind the assault group. It had 3 teams, 30 men, armed with the machine guns. Its mission was to support the assault group with machine gun fire, evacuate the wounded, and resupply ammunition. The heavy weapons group had 1 10-man team armed with the mortars. It established firing positions across the Wardak River. The firing sites were screened from observation by Katabuch Hill. We occupied our prepared positions in the dark. At about 0900 hours, the forward security element of the Soviet convoy drove into the kill zone from the north. There were 2 BMPs and another APC in the forward security element. We let them pass. The forward security element just cleared the kill zone and then stopped. They must have assumed that the way was safe, since they then signaled the main body of the convoy to proceed. The forward security element waited while the main body, consisting of GAZ-66 trucks and armored vehicles, moved out of the green zone south of Shekabad village and into the kill zone. As the column moved into the kill zone, we opened up on the forward security element with our anti-tank weapons. We destroyed both BMPs and the other APC. Then we shifted our fire to the main convoy. The fighting lasted for 2 hours. The enemy returned fire from his APCs and other armored vehicles, but their fire had limited effect against our well-prepared positions. We punished the enemy severely with our anti-tank fire and mortar fire. The enemy did little to change the situation or to try to gain the initiative. They merely returned fire, and those caught in the kill zone died there. I commanded the first team of the assault group. By 1100 hours, we had destroyed all the vehicles in the kill zone, and we swarmed into the area to capture whatever weapons and equipment we could carry. Then we withdrew. We left 17 armored vehicles and 45 GAZ-66 trucks and gas tankers burning in the kill zone. We captured 4 AK-74 assault rifles, the exclusive weapon of the Soviet forces. Mujahideen casualties were 10 KIA and 2 WIA. Commentary. Thorough planning, good intelligence, detailed instructions to the combat elements, and a simple task organization all contributed to the success of the ambush. The heavily armed Mujahideen were well disciplined and controlled. They inflicted maximum losses on the Soviet column before moving forward to loot. This was very effective, since it maximized their advantage of fighting from well-protected positions against an enemy caught by surprise and trapped in the open. Perhaps the ambush should have had 4 elements. The support group had a combat mission, machine gun support, to the assault group, and a logistics mission of ammunition resupply and medical evacuation. Perhaps these missions should have assigned to different groups. Further, the heavy weapons group needed more men. 10 men cannot adequately handle 4 mortars, let alone 8. The Soviets contributed to their own disaster. The forward security element cleared the area by simply driving through it, and since they were not fired on, they assumed that it was safe. This was a favorite Mujahideen ambush site, complete with well-prepared positions. The Mujahideen had conducted several ambushes from this very site in the past. As a minimum, the Soviets should have sent a force to destroy the positions prior to the convoy departure. Then, the forward security element should have dismounted some troops to search the area for possible ambush and held it until the convoy passed. The forward security element further contributed to the disaster by stopping within anti-tank weapons range, 300 to 800 meters, in an area where the terrain restricted vehicular movement and waiting for the convoy to catch up to it. When the Mujahideen fired on these stationary targets, the forward security element became a burning blockade which trapped the convoy. Had the forward security element moved well ahead of the convoy, it could have allowed part of the convoy to escape south and enabled the forward security element to return to provide firepower to help extricate the trapped vehicles. Had the forward security element moved off the road to the west and taken up covered positions out of anti-tank weapons range, it could have provided considerable immediate firepower to the convoy. Chapter Commentary. The Mujahideen conducted ambushes for harassment or for spoils. Often, harassing ambushes were small-scale ambushes that would only fire a few rounds into the convoy or destroy or damage some vehicles. Then, the ambushers would withdraw without attempting to loot the column before the convoy commander could react. Ambushes conducted for spoils, weapons, ammunition, food, clothing, and other military supplies, were normally conducted by larger forces who could maintain their positions for up to an hour. Still, the ambush was a short-term action designed to capitalize on surprise and terrain. Roadblocks, discussed in a later chapter, were designed to fight the enemy to a standstill and prevent his passage for an extended period of time. Ambushes for spoils were essential to maintaining the Mujahideen in the field. Mujahideen were unpaid volunteers. Most of them had family responsibilities. Normally, all captured heavy weapons and a fifth of the spoils went to the commander. The other 4/5 was divided among the Mujahideen combatants. Many Mujahideen would take their captured Kalashnikovs and other trophies to Pakistan, where they would sell them and then give the money to their families to live on. Although the popular concept of the Mujahideen combatant is a hardened warrior clutching a Kalashnikov assault rifle, the most important Mujahideen weapon in the conflict was the RPG-7 anti-tank grenade launcher. This Soviet-manufactured short-range weapon allowed the Mujahideen to knock out tanks, trucks, and occasionally helicopters. The RPG was a great equalizer and a great weapon in an ambush. Although the Mujahideen were light infantry, heavier crew-served weapons gave them more range and staying power in a fight. Mortars, rockets, recoilless rifles, and heavy machine guns were essential to the force that intended to hold its ground for a time against mechanized Soviet and DRA forces. The standard Soviet DRA convoy had a group of armored vehicles at the front of the convoy, more armored vehicles spaced evenly throughout the convoy, and another group of armored vehicles constituting a rear guard. The convoy might have a helicopter or ground advance guard or patrol sweep the route prior to movement. Sometimes a mine detection clearing force would precede the convoy, although mine clearing was usually the responsibility of the unit guarding the road, and the convoy would not start until the unit had given the all clear. Sometimes a convoy would have artillery groups move within the column and leapfrog to provide rapid on-call fire support. When hit, the convoy's standard reaction was to leave armored vehicles inside the kill zone to return fire while the trucks drove out of the kill zone. If the armored vehicles chased the ambushers away, the convoy would continue. If the armored vehicles could not deal with the ambush, helicopter gunships could usually drive the ambushers from their positions. The convoy commander tried to maintain the movement of this convoy and would not usually turn forces around to deal with ambushes. Sometimes this meant that an ambush would split a convoy. The Soviets and DRA seldom dismounted infantry to pursue their ambushers since convoy movement had priority, and they seldom had enough infantry accompanying the convoy to pursue the Mujahideen into their neighborhood and overpower them. The Mujahideen seldom hit the head of a column unless terrain allowed them to bottle up the column by doing so. The Mujahideen preferred to hit the middle of the convoy where there were fewer armored vehicles. If possible, they tried to seal off the section of convoy they were attacking if they meant to loot it. Mujahideen usually prepared fighting positions at the ambush site, which enabled them to withstand fire from enemy armored vehicles and sometimes helicopter gunships. The most successful Mujahideen ambushes organized the ambush into a heavy weapons support group, flank security groups, an assault group, and a logistics support spoils removal group. The best ambushes had a well-understood chain of command and radio communications between the groups. Following the ambush, the flank security groups, with an air defense element, covered the withdrawal of the groups over a secured withdrawal route.